Let me start with something that sounds exaggerated, but isn't. There's a plant that, gram for gram, contains more protein than beef, more iron than spinach, and more calcium than milk. Not a supplement, not a lab-created powder, not some influencer-backed formula, a plant. And here's where things get strange. In multiple countries, this plant was discouraged, quietly removed from food systems, or brushed off as poor people food. In some places, it was deliberately replaced with imported foods that delivered less nutrition at a higher cost. I've spent years testing diets, comparing real food to marketed superfoods, digging into nutrition data, and talking to farmers instead of influencers. And once you understand what this plant actually does and how cheap and accessible it is, the real question becomes uncomfortable. Why isn't everyone eating it? Today I'll show you why this plant was once celebrated, why it later disappeared, and why it might be one of the most underrated nutritional tools on the planet. This isn't hype. This is trench-level nutrition reality. The plant is Moringa oleifera. Depending on where you're from, you might hear it called the drumstick tree, the miracle tree, or the horseradish tree. But before we go any further, let's clear something up. Moringa is not magic. It doesn't cure everything, it doesn't replace a balanced diet, and it won't fix years of poor habits overnight. But nutritionally, it punches far above its weight. The leaves contain complete plant protein with essential amino acids, extremely high iron levels, massive calcium content, vitamins A, C, and E, along with magnesium, potassium, zinc, and anti-inflammatory compounds most vegetables don't even come close to. When the leaves are dried properly, that nutrition becomes even more concentrated. And this is what surprised me early on when you compare cost per nutrient. Moringa absolutely humiliates most modern health foods. No branding, no influencer markup, no fancy packaging, just raw, functional nutrition. Now you've probably heard the claim that moringa is more powerful than beef, spinach, and milk combined. That sounds like clickbait, so let's talk reality. These comparisons are gram for gram, not plate for plate. Nobody is saying you should replace a steak with a handful of leaves. Per 100 grams of dried moringa leaf powder, protein content can rival or exceed lean beef. Iron levels can reach 7 to 10 times that of spinach, and calcium can be several times higher than milk. But here's the part most videos skip: bioavailability matters. Your body doesn't absorb plant nutrients the same way it absorbs nutrients from animal products. That's true. However, moringa's nutrient density is so high that even with lower absorption, the net intake remains impressive. This is especially important in places where meat is expensive, dairy is limited, and supplements are out of reach. That's exactly where moringa historically thrived. This is where things get uncomfortable. Moringa wasn't pushed aside because it didn't work. It was pushed aside because it worked too well. During colonial expansion and the rise of industrial agriculture, local food systems were dismantled and replaced. Plants like Moringa oleifera, which grow fast, require minimal water, thrive in poor soil, and provide food, medicine, and animal feed all at once, were discouraged in favor of export crops, shelf-stable imports, and centralized food control. You can't patent moringa. You can't easily monopolize it. You can't build a long supply chain around something people can grow in their backyard. And when a food gives people nutritional independence, it quietly becomes inconvenient. I'll be honest, I didn't buy into moringa at first. I treated it like every other so-called superfood. So I tested it. I used dried moringa leaf powder, fresh leaves cooked lightly, and capsules, which were by far the least impressive. What I noticed wasn't some dramatic overnight transformation. It was subtle, practical changes. More stable energy, less joint stiffness, better digestion, and easier recovery after physical work. No jitters, no crashes, no dependency. That's usually how real food works. Quiet, consistent, and boring in the best way possible. So let me ask you this, have you ever bought a superfood that did absolutely nothing? Greens powders, spirulina, adaptogens, miracle blends that promised the world and delivered nothing. I've got a list of disappointments myself. And that's exactly why moringa stands out. It doesn't rely on stimulation. It doesn't trick your nervous system, it just feeds your body. When you compare moringa to modern supplements, the contrast is embarrassing. Most supplements isolate single nutrients, strip away natural cofactors, and rely on synthetic binders and fillers. Moringa delivers whole food nutrition with natural absorption synergy, and the cost difference is wild. A month of moringa powder can cost less than a single bottle of branded capsules that provide less value. That's why I tell people this: if your budget is tight, moringa beats about 80% of supplements purely on value. One reason moringa disappeared from mainstream diets is psychological. In many regions, it was labeled as food for the poor, famine food, or emergency nutrition. Once something gets that label, it loses status, even if it's superior. We've seen this pattern before with sardines, organ meats, bone broth, and fermented foods. Cheap, accessible, powerful foods tend to get ignored once society chases convenience and prestige. Moringa fell into the same trap. If you're going to use moringa, here's the no-hype advice. Fresh leaves, lightly cooked, are excellent. Properly dried leaf powder processed at low heat is the next best option. What I'd avoid are overpriced capsules, sugary moringa drinks, and detox blends that use trace amounts for marketing. Use the powder in soups, savory dishes, or lightly blend it into smoothies. Start small. This isn't a stimulant, it's nutrition. Your body doesn't need massive doses. If you want to see the exact moringa sources I trust or the preparation methods that actually preserve nutrients, I've linked those resources in the description. Nothing salesy, just information for people who want to go deeper. Moringa isn't for everyone, but it shines for people on tight food budgets, those reducing meat consumption, athletes who need micronutrients, older adults concerned about bone health, and anyone rebuilding their nutritional foundation. It's not a shortcut. It's a base layer. So here's another honest question. If moringa disappeared tomorrow, what food? Now, there's something I need to address before people take this the wrong way. Because every time moringa comes up, it attracts two extremes. On one side, you've got people dismissing it as folklore. On the other, you've got people treating it like a cure-all. Both are wrong. And if you've been around nutrition long enough, you start to recognize this pattern instantly. Anything genuinely useful eventually gets hijacked by exaggeration, and once that happens, serious people stop listening. That's been moringa's biggest problem in the modern era. Not that it doesn't work, but that too many people tried to make it sound magical instead of practical. One myth that needs to die is the idea that moringa somehow replaces meat, dairy, or vegetables entirely. It doesn't. What it does is fill gaps. Big ones. Especially micronutrient gaps that creep in quietly and don't show symptoms until years later. Iron deficiency, calcium imbalance, chronic low-grade inflammation, mineral depletion from stress, this is where moringa earns its place. Not as a star of the plate, but as structural support underneath everything else you're eating. Think of it less like a meal and more like reinforcement. Another thing people don't talk about enough is consistency. I've tested plenty of foods that look great on paper but are impossible to use long-term. They're too expensive, too inconvenient, or they just don't fit into normal meals. Moringa is the opposite. Once you get past the unfamiliar name, it's almost boring in how easy it is to use. Leaves cook like any other green. Powder blends into food without taking over the flavor if you don't overdo it. That's a big deal, because sustainability always beats intensity. The best nutrition strategy is the one you can stick to when motivation disappears. Let's talk about taste for a second, because nobody likes pretending food is enjoyable when it isn't. Fresh moringa leaves have a mild, slightly earthy flavor, somewhere between spinach and arugula. Cooked lightly, they lose most of the bitterness people complain about. The powder is stronger, more grassy, but still manageable. If someone tells you it tastes amazing on its own, they're lying. But if someone tells you it's unbearable, they're exaggerating. Like most nutrient-dense foods, it rewards smart preparation. Another overlooked point is how moringa behaves under stress conditions. Heat, drought, poor soil, this plant doesn't just survive. It keeps producing nutrient-dense leaves. That matters more than most people realize. A food that only works in ideal conditions isn't resilient. Moringa is. And resilience is nutrition security. That's one of the reasons humanitarian organizations quietly rely on it while mainstream food culture ignores it. Now, we need to talk about safety because any honest conversation includes limits. Moringa leaves are safe for most people when consumed as food. Roots and bark are another story and should not be treated casually. This is where bad information spreads fast. Stick to the leaves. Start small. If you've never used it before, your digestive system may need time to adjust, just like with any fiber-rich food. More is not better. Better is better. I also want to address something subtle but important. When people switch to moringa, they often feel less hungry, and they mistake that for appetite suppression. What's actually happening is nutrient sufficiency. When your body finally gets minerals it's been missing, cravings calm down. That's not a trick, that's biology. This is one of the reasons moringa quietly helps people improve eating habits without willpower battles. It reduces nutritional noise. If you're wondering whether this is just another trend making the rounds, look at who is not promoting it. You won't see massive corporations pushing moringa aggressively. You won't see billion-dollar branding campaigns. That alone should tell you something. Most profitable nutrition products are heavily processed, shelf-stable, and proprietary. Moringa doesn't fit that model. It grows, it regenerates. It spreads knowledge instead of dependence. Something else I've noticed over the years is how moringa changes the conversation around food. People stop asking, "What's the newest thing?" and start asking, "What actually sustains me?" That's a quiet but powerful shift. Once that happens, a lot of marketing loses its grip. And that's probably the most threatening thing about this plant. It encourages people to think long-term. If you're the kind of person who likes experimenting, moringa is one of those ingredients that teaches you quickly. You feel the difference when you stop using it. Energy dips slightly. Recovery feels slower. Not dramatically, but noticeably. That's usually how foundational nutrients behave. You don't notice them until they're gone. And here's something rarely mentioned. Moringa plays well with other foods. It doesn't compete. It complements. Pair it with legumes, grains, vegetables, or even animal protein, and it fills nutritional blind spots instead of overlapping excessively. That synergy matters. Nutrition isn't about stacking the same benefits over and over. It's about coverage. At this point, some people will still say, if it's so good, why didn't it take over the world? And the answer is simple. Foods don't win because they're good. They win because they're profitable, controllable, and marketable. Moringa is good. Too good to need permission. And history shows that the most resilient foods are rarely the most advertised ones. So as we move into the next part, I want you to keep this mindset. Don't ask whether moringa is perfect. Ask whether it's useful. Ask whether it's accessible. Ask whether it does its job quietly, without drama, because those are the tools that last. In the next section, I'm going to break down how moringa compares to other so-called super greens, why many of them fail in real-world use, and how to spot the difference between nutritional noise and nutritional signals so you never fall for hype again. Once you start comparing Moringa oleifera to other so-called super greens, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Most of the popular green powders on the market aren't designed to nourish first, they're designed to sell. Long ingredient lists, exotic names, proprietary blends, and just enough science-sounding language to feel convincing. On paper, they look impressive. In real life, most people don't feel much of anything. That's not because greens don't work, it's because dilution kills effectiveness. When you cram 20 ingredients into one scoop, each one becomes nutritionally insignificant. Moringa avoids that trap entirely by being simple, concentrated, and whole. I've tested a lot of these blends over the years, and the outcome is almost always the same. Short-term enthusiasm, followed by indifference. Either the taste becomes unbearable, the price becomes unjustifiable, or the benefits fade once the novelty wears off. With moringa, the experience is different. There's no honeymoon phase. It just quietly integrates. And that's usually how you know something is legitimate. Real nutrition doesn't scream. It whispers and sticks around. Another reason moringa holds up in real-world use is that it doesn't rely on stimulation or detox language. Many green products lean heavily on laxative effects, diuretics, or stimulants to create the illusion that something is happening. Moringa doesn't do that. There's no artificial urgency, no forced cleansing, no dramatic reactions. What it supports instead is baseline function energy production, mineral balance, tissue repair. These are boring benefits, but boring benefits are what keep you functional year after year. Something else worth mentioning is how moringa behaves across different body types and lifestyles. Heavy laborers, athletes, office workers, older adults, everyone experiences it slightly differently, but the common thread is resilience. People don't suddenly feel superhuman. They feel steadier. And in my experience, steadiness beats spikes every single time. Energy spikes burn out. Stability compounds. There's also a cultural blind spot here that rarely gets addressed. When a food comes from poorer regions or non-Western traditions, it's often dismissed until it's rebranded and resold. Turmeric went through this. Quinoa did too. Even olive oil was once considered peasant food. Moringa just hasn't been fully rediscovered, yet at least not in a way that benefits everyday people instead of corporations. And honestly, that delay might be protecting it. Let's talk briefly about growing it, because this is where moringa becomes almost unfair. In the right climate, it grows fast. Very fast. You can harvest leaves repeatedly without killing the plant. Few foods offer that kind of return with such low input. No fertilizers, no complex care, no dependence on supply chains. From a resilience standpoint, that alone puts moringa in a different category than most foods people rely on daily. Now, one mistake I see people make is treating moringa like a fix. They add it to a broken lifestyle and expect results. That's not how it works. Moringa amplifies what's already there. If your diet is chaotic, your sleep is poor, and stress is constant, it won't save you. But if you're building something sustainable, it becomes a multiplier. That's an important distinction. Tools don't replace effort. They reward it. Another underappreciated benefit is how moringa affects long-term habits. Because it's affordable and accessible, people don't feel pressure to ration it or save it for special days. That mindset shift matters. When nutrition becomes normal instead of precious, consistency improves. And consistency is where real results live. I also want to address skepticism, because healthy skepticism is a good thing. If you're listening to this thinking, this still sounds too good, that's fine. You should question claims, but question them evenly. Ask why foods with worse profiles get promoted endlessly while something like moringa barely gets mentioned. Ask who benefits from that imbalance. Skepticism shouldn't just point downward, it should look upward too. Over time, what I've come to respect most about moringa is that it doesn't try to impress you. It doesn't need rebranding every year. It doesn't need seasonal trends. It's the same plant it's always been, doing the same job it's done for generations. And in a world that constantly changes the rules, there's something powerful about that kind of reliability. If you're still on the fence, here's my practical advice. Don't commit mentally. Don't believe in it. Just test it properly. Use it consistently for a few weeks. Pay attention to how your body feels, not how excited you are. If it does nothing for you, move on. Real confidence doesn't require belief, it survives testing. As we head into the final part, I want to zoom out and connect the dots. Not just about moringa, but about how we choose food in general. Why some things get elevated, others erased, and how to build a nutrition strategy that isn't controlled by trends, fear, or marketing. Because once you understand that system, moringa stops being a curiosity and starts making complete sense. And that's where this conversation gets bigger than one plant. When you step back and look at the bigger picture, Moringa oleifera stops being the miracle plant and starts becoming something far more important, a reminder. A reminder of how nutrition actually worked before branding, before algorithms, before food became a product instead of a foundation. For most of human history, the most valuable foods weren't rare or exotic, they were reliable. They grew where people lived, they adapted to harsh conditions, and they delivered steady nourishment without demanding attention. Moringa fits that pattern perfectly, and that's why it never needed hype to survive. What we've lost over time isn't just specific plants, but food literacy. We've been trained to outsource decisions, to trust labels more than outcomes, and to chase novelty instead of stability. That's how entire generations ended up surrounded by food but undernourished. Not because options are scarce, but because priorities got distorted. Moringa cuts through that distortion. It doesn't ask you to believe anything. It just shows up, does its job, and lets the results speak quietly over time. If you take one lesson from this video, let it be this. The most powerful nutritional tools are rarely the ones being aggressively sold to you. They're usually the ones sitting in the background, unchanged, waiting for someone to notice them again. When something is cheap, effective, and difficult to control, it doesn't fit neatly into modern systems. So it gets labeled, sidelined, or forgotten. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded without permission. This is also why I'm careful about how moringa is used and talked about. The moment it becomes another trend, it loses its strength. Trends burn fast and die young. Foundations endure. Use moringa the way it was always meant to be used, as support, not spectacle, as reinforcement, not replacement, as part of a system, not the center of it. That mindset alone will put you ahead of most people chasing health through headlines. So before you move on to the next video, take a second and think about your own approach to food. Ask yourself whether you're buying what works or what's loud. Whether your choices are driven by results or by repetition. Whether you're feeding systems or building your own resilience. Because once you start asking better questions, foods like Moringa oleifera stop feeling mysterious and start feeling obvious. If this conversation shifted how you think even slightly, do the simple things, like the video. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this. And watch the next one, where I uncover another overlooked food that quietly outperforms modern nutrition trends without asking for attention. Remember, real strength doesn't announce itself. It just keeps working,